Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I'm gonna ramble on for a bit about PTS number 2 for year 5, season 3. As we already had one PTS, but that was mostly project resolves changes. This second PTS also includes the gear and weapons for the new season, especially as well, for instance, new exotics and a new gear set, a new brand set, some names. So we'll go over those as well here. And together with that, some minor changes and additions to what Project Resolves already was going to do with gear balance or gear and weapon balancing. So we'll go over some of those. And as well, of course, I've updated the burst and sustain tables. We'll hit on that. Some of the other minor changes. I won't hit on everything, but mostly the things I kind of care about. The patch notes, of course, will be linked down below, and everything will be timestamped in this video, so you can jump around as you wish. So if only parts are interesting to you, just jump to those parts. But first, let's jump into the patch notes, and I'll give a general overview of all the points we're going to hit today. And yeah, the patch notes are linked down below, of course, if you want to read them for yourself. Just briefly, yeah, we'll go definitely over the new gear and brand sets, Palisade and Aegis, as well the new exotics, as for instance, a new exotic glove is coming in, a new exotic rifle, and a new exotic pistol. We'll discuss them in their own segments. A new talent, which, as a spoiler warning, is a little bit too much. I would expect this maybe to get rebalanced before it hits the game, I would hope. Yeah, we have a bunch of balancing changes. Some of the talents got reworked. We'll definitely hit on Intimidate, especially because, yeah, that got some changes. And actually, I think it will be a good talent to use. On the weapon ends, we'll go into a deep burst and sustain table. And as well, I've updated, as I did with PTS1, the on builds. So putting the weapons on a striker set and comparing them on there, as of course some of the weapons have one mod slot less for a crit chance mod. So you kind of need to compare them on a build, because otherwise, if you're just looking at their pure burst and sustain, it doesn't really make sense. They've added in a few weapons, the AKs, the AUGs, and the PDR came into this list for the ARs especially. It's still missing a few, and some are left behind. We'll discuss that in the AR section. All the LMGs are still, all the high-end ones are still getting a +20. Some of the exotics are getting a +10, and the Pestilence isn't in here. We'll discuss that in the LMG section. Same as well, the SMG list is actually exactly the same as the previous time. So is the rifles ones, although I had 2 mistakes in each of these sections, so we'll go over those in PTS1, in the burst table. So actually, the list is actually looking a little bit different than from PTS1. I won't be going over marksman rifles, but what I can already tell you is that, yeah, the M700s are looking really good, and will likely beat out White Deaths coming up. There are some brand set changes. We'll just very briefly hit on those. Tinker Station, will actually start with that one, as that is one of my favorite additions. Some recalibration and optimization changes. Combat gear lock and descent we'll discuss at the end, together with the projects as well, project changes. So yeah, let's just get started and keep going till we get through all of this. And let's start off with one of my favorite changes, actually, of it, which is that the recalibration station has been removed and replaced with the tinkering station, which is completely different, of course. Except basically what it has done is combined optimization and recalibration under this tinkering. The library is still here. The expertise is still here. Expertise is also still its own thing. Going into the tinkering menu from here, we see that basically all of the gears are here. And basically when you select something that is, for instance, not optimized or recalibrated, you can from here both do optimizations and recalibrations to it. But actually what I really enjoy about the change is now as well, in your inventory, anywhere in the world, you can basically pull up your inventory. Going to any gear or weapon, you can basically go to any of the weapons or gear. So for instance, here I have a Providence chest that is free talentable. And if I were to think like, hey, I have Unbreakable on it now for some testing purposes earlier. I want it to be spotted now. It is spotted now. And I can do that at the start of a mission or something. I could totally see myself using this and playing around with talents a lot more because of it. Especially on weapons, I could go like, once for this run, while we're waiting to get started, you know what, this is a harder mission, I'd rather have preservation, you know, stuff like that. And to me, it is a very good change. It is UI-wise very great. The one downside currently in PTS is that it has no sound, and that feels really weird, because actually if you do it from the tinkering station, it does have sounds and feels normal, but yeah, having a UI without any movement sounds or anything, which it normally has, feels quite odd, but they'll hopefully fix that. And yeah, to me, that tinkering menu is very much a great addition. And you can go also to the main tinkering menu if you don't select a specific item, and you can still add to your library and alter your expertise and stuff as well. So yeah, let's move on to the next. And to start off with the gear set. The gear set is kind of interesting. It is a tank set. Will it compete with existing Foundry or high-end Cavaliers for especially Iron Horse Raid, where actually tanks gets used? I'm not certain. I'll leave that up to especially raid players to kind of figure out for themselves. But yeah, we got 2 pieces of health, 3 pieces total armor, 4 pieces gives us the damage resistance talent. This is a new thing, especially as we've had skill damage resistance, we've had a resistance to elites, basically PFE is basically that. But we get as well this damage resistance is reliant on enemies targeting you. And you get 3% with the backpack, 4%, even though here it says from 3 to 4, it's actually 4%. And it's also reliant on, it's multiplied by 1.x, where x is the number of agents in your group. So with 8-man content, this will be a 7.2 with that backpack as well. We're taking into 4% and then times 1.8, 7.2 per enemy. I could see that being useful. I can see that being maybe put to some work. It's just a talent is that decoys then as well count towards Stoic. I could see this maybe situationally being useful, although Vanguard is too useful to give up, really, or maybe even a target raid. Especially in a raid setting, Vanguard is just the go-to. I could see using the backpack talent for going Protector or Galvanize or stuff like that. And I may be taking a Catharsis. As well, on the buff bar, you do get an icon showing how many enemies are targeting you, because that's, of course, kind of handy to know, so you can kind of gauge how much resistance you have, how aggressive you can be with it. I tried it out a little bit as a PFE setup with 4 pieces and 2 pieces improvised, going both PFE and its resistances, and yeah, some crit chance, crit damage to make an Oreo work, kind of. It wasn't too terrible. You can make that work, but you can also already do that with Foundry, I feel. Is it useful? Maybe for raids. In general play, it'll see some use, because yeah, people will just use it. People seem to sometimes, some people like tank sets. Will it actually be useful? I don't think so. Looks-wise as well, it is looks to be new assets, although there is one oddity. If we look to this icon here, which is the triangle with the 3 circles in it, which is the Aegis set, that isn't the backpack and the chest have this this head of an animal, the skull of an animal, and yeah, that's not the same thing. So I'm not sure if it's reused asset or not. And yeah, the gloves have a little bit of a clipping issue on female models, and I couldn't match it up to any existing set quite quickly. And it's a very plain looking set, which is kind of odd as well. The tanking sets usually look kind of beefy if you look to Foundry and stuff, and this doesn't look that, so it's a little bit odd. I'm guessing they were planning maybe on something else and they reused the assets here, and they'll come into play in a second as well with the gear set, which is actually completely reused assets. And the new brand set is Palisade Steelworks. On its 1 piece, you get plus 10% armor and kill. On its 2 piece, you get plus 60% health, and on its 3 piece, you get plus 1 skill tier. Especially the first one and the third one kind of can be useful in some cases. Armor and kill, I could definitely see being used, as especially for instance with Hunter's Fury, which already comes with 20% armor and kill. People already run that with sometimes Gunner to get 30% armor and kill. You could have a 1-piece Palisade in there, giving up, for instance, a Grupo or maybe a Cheska piece, and getting to 40% armor and kill. I could see that working especially solo and being kind of useful and more of a utility kind of thing, not being going all in on damage, but just having a little bit more consistency and a little bit more like relaxed casual play. The 60% health is getting capped at 2k to a set amount. I've actually taken time here to take away all of the health rolls that this comes with. As this is how you get some of the gear, so don't look at the stats too much, but yeah, I've taken all of the health out of it, just so we have the 561 here, which would be if you had no health rolls on your gear, and you just had that plus 60% health at 2k, as that's where it's capped, so you don't need to be as high a shade level as I am there. And you would get 561k health out of it from the 360 that you would normally have. And that is a decent increase, and especially with Hunter's Fury again, I could maybe see using 2 pieces of this and as Hunter's Fury as well again. Heals you for 100% of your health. So you would be getting that on top, plus the armor on kill, plus I could see that kind of being made to work, but it won't be great still. That skill tier, it's too far away, I think, with bonuses that don't really hit the same, hit the same pieces. I don't think that will find much use. But I could definitely see the 2-piece being used. One thing I want to make a note of as well, as we looked at the appearance of the other one, the appearance of this, you can already actually check for yourself in the game, as it is a reuse, and it very much, if we go into the appearance slot, and for the chest, I believe it's the blue Overlord. It's reusing Overlord pieces, because yeah, if we actually toggle preview on and off, you see that all that changes is the color. Although luckily for them, there is no logos on it, so it's not as obvious as, for instance, Habsburg, which has Providence logos plastered all over it. But yeah, it is a reused model. I'm fine with that. It is actually, for instance, a model that I didn't instantly recognize. Same for the backpack. It is the Overlord high-end backpack. And that's brands we don't use much, so yeah, reusing the models for them is fine. And that's kind of the thing with the gear set itself as well, especially that 10% armor on kill. I could see finding some use here and there, especially for solo play, where you can make all of the kills and get all of the armor with Gunner, with Hunter's Fury. I could see that being useful. And that's kind of the set as well. It's fine, basically. Let's move on to its named pieces. And we'll start with the Combustor, which is perfectly explosive delivery. Perfect explosive delivery seems a much more reasonable wording to use. Yeah, it is an increase to just normal explosive delivery. And especially what it has over normal explosive delivery is that this explosion, explosive delivery used to have 1 explosion 1.5 seconds after deploying a skill. This has a continuous one. Every 5 seconds it will continue to make booms happen, and I'll show that here. As we get 1 boom, and then every 5 seconds we consistently will continue getting a boom. And it's kind of interesting because as well, it's one of the, this explosion actually crosses over door boundaries, which most explosions usually don't. So it can be maybe useful for that. It's giving up a chest talent though. I don't see myself using this because while it's interesting, it's not that useful just in comparison to glass, for instance, on a build. I might see myself using it maybe for very specific uses, maybe when Woni boosting or something, and we have places where we have just doors that spawn a ton of people. I might quickly just put this chest on and then just use it for one part or something. But those are so minor cases that's trying to find a use for it. And yeah, for the rest of it, it's basically the same as explosive delivery. It's scaling off of a concussion grenade damage. So especially on an explosive build, you can get that number up a little bit, of course. But yeah, glass gives you a 30% or 25%, depending. Well, 25% with the brand bonus, or 30% with perfect glass increase. In almost all cases that I would even think about using this, I'm just gonna pick glass instead. Let's move on to the backpack talent as well. And the backpack talent is, to me, a little bit more interesting, as it is perfectly tamper-proof. Again, perfect tamper-proof seems perfectly fine. And this is, of course, an increase to tamper-proof on its also triggering off of decoy, because normal tamper-proof didn't. It was hive, turrets, and remote pulse. Here we're adding in decoys to the mix. And of course, as well, tamper-proof is normally a chest talent. So now it's been moved to a backpack. So this is, again, one of those places where it's been moved to a different place. And this actually kind of seems useful to me. I could totally see me using this, for instance, on foam eclipses for certain places where, for instance, you don't need creeping death, but you're still door camping. I could totally see this being useful, as yeah, you can just toss out your decoy. In this case, for instance, I'm going to do it with a decoy, although other tools could just be as handy. And yeah, after a few seconds, it charges up and starts shocking everything. Together, of course, you can run this together with explosive delivery as well, kind of shocking them in place and then also booming them. But yeah, on Eclipse, I would definitely keep the chest. So, but I could see me using this, especially because yeah, it provides some options. Having tamper-proof now in the backpack is interesting at the very least. I could see this having some uses. And next up, we have the first of the exotics. We'll start with the glove, which is the new rugged gauntlets. They come with iron grip as their talent. They do come with red core and crit chance crit damage, so at least that part is useful. You are giving up, of course, a brand bonus basically using these, and you would be giving up that brand bonus for this iron grip talent, which is minus 50% recoil penalty when hip firing, and minus 50% recoil penalty when blind firing from cover. Now, I do blind fire from cover a lot, so if this was useful, I might find it useful, but it isn't useful, so I don't. Hip firing, I don't do much, and yeah, sometimes you have to because you're on fire, for instance, or something. The reduction of it isn't enough to me, because that's on 15 meters, and yeah, I'd much rather just peek out and or replace myself over there and then start shooting or something instead of doing this. Hipfire already kind of on short ranges works really well. If an enemy is really close to you, you can definitely kill them, especially if they're already a little bit damaged. This doesn't give enough reduction for it to be really useful because yeah, even if we set it to like 10 meters here and shoot from here, we're getting some hits in, but it's also not even, to me, that noticeable of a change between this and not having the gloves on. There is definitely a difference. The spread is less, is what I feel mostly is happening there. But yeah, that makes it not that useful to me. Looks-wise, it's kind of interesting, but also, yeah, this one will likely be a pass for me because especially in this slot as well, we have the Bloody Knuckles, and the Bloody Knuckles have a damage component to them. I'll see me using this here and there to proficiency it, and then it's going to go into the stash. Let's move on to the pistol next. The Mosquito is the new exotic pistol we'll be getting. Its base model is an M9. It isn't getting any crit chance, crit damage mods. It's coming with reload speed and accuracy as its mods. That already hurts it a little bit, and we will be able to change the third stat to detox. I haven't done that here as the blueprints aren't available actually in the PTS. And yeah, talent-wise, of course, is its interesting part is that hitting an enemy applies a stack. Stacks are shared between players. At 10 stacks, the enemy will forcefully target the last player to apply a stack for 5 seconds. This could maybe be an interesting mechanic, and yeah, of course, this needs some further testing, especially in groups, which I haven't really done with it. I have tried it out just a little bit in a 2-man, and yeah, the enemies do forcefully target you and pull to you. So you could use that together, of course, with Behind You, which is the new talent of the season, to forcefully target something to you so others can make Behind You work. So yeah, it actually is an interesting way of getting aggro to the player, although it is you have to hit 10 shots. It is a 350 RPM weapon, so that does take quite a bit, at least basically 2 seconds. At 300 RPM, it will be 2 seconds to get those 10 rounds on an enemy. And yeah, as well, stacks deplete every 5 seconds. Also, activating it on one enemy will remove it from all other enemies, including stacks from other people. So yeah, you need to kind of coordinate with it as well because of that, because you can't have multiple people running this and trying to pull away multiples. But if one person is kind of running this in a raid, especially, this forcefully target also, I haven't, for instance, tested it on interesting places like right. Can we forcefully target him to a different player? That would be interesting. I haven't done that testing, especially as well in raid. Might be useful to keep Boomer targeted to, you know, someone, because sometimes he roams around. Same for Johnson, for instance, in the incursion, might be useful. But yeah, that kind of testing I haven't done, so I can't really talk to that. And yeah, model-wise, it is actually kind of good looking, as we'll go into photo mode here and look at it in some hands. And yeah, it has this little bit of a pattern on it. It does look pretty good, and I do like the look of it, especially with its extended mag. And yeah, when fired as well, its slide doesn't move, which always annoys me as well, because the M9 as well, I believe, doesn't have a moving slide. But yeah, it's fine. And I think as well, setup-wise, people will likely find some use for this, especially if it kind of can work in the raid or incursion. I could definitely see this finding some use. In general play or as a general pistol, yeah, there are better choices that we have already. But at the very least, it's interesting. So that's a point towards it. And on to the Vindicator, the exotic rifle for the coming season. It is based on the MDR. It's sourcing-wise, it is attached in the PTS to the NSA Tech store, which is the Sense store, for a very reasonable price over there as well. And that will likely as well be where it will come from coming in the new season. So yeah, maybe it might be worth already saving up some NSA tech already. It's coming here with swap speed. We don't have the blueprint in the PTS to re-roll it or reconfigure it. So testing wise, I couldn't test it with DTOC, but it should have DTOC in the coming season. Sometimes not at the start of the season. But yeah, all weapons are re-rollable in the coming season, which is a big change. But yeah, here we couldn't. Also an oddity, just to point it out, this is 14.4 swap speed, and it's showing as full swap speed is 15. For a level 40 weapon. So yeah, that's just as an oddity. It's based on MDR. Mods wise, to start off with that there, it's accuracy, +5 rounds, stability, and +10 optimal range. No crit chance on the mods, which usually hurts a weapon quite a lot, and does so here as well. But it's fine basically, because you can make up for that, especially if the talent is good. And this talent is pretty good. And that is that, while scoped, the weapon will highlight a random body section of each enemy. The weapon deals +75% weapon damage to highlighted body sections. We'll get to that 50s +75 weapon damage in a second with a spreadsheet. But this, yeah, while scoped, the enemy will highlight a random body section. It will highlight it in green. It's either the head, the body, or the legs. And hitting that marked part will cause bonus damage to happen. If the talent is basically inactive, it's acting as a pretty poor MDR, because a normal MDR could have, for instance, a boomerang, and together with crit chance mods, making for a better hit if you're not hitting those points. But of course, when you are hitting it, it states here +75 weapon damage. That isn't the case. We'll actually jump in a second to a spreadsheet where this is a +75% amp, but it works a little bit weird. We'll discuss that in a second. One other thing as well is that, well, like in the range, it doesn't mark enemies. You do still have the scope. So it is a scoped weapon. It is an 8x scope. It does currently not work with focus. It should, because it's 8x scopes. If it works with focus in the future, I could totally see this being a decent tool to use either in high-end or negotiator with the rifle, because that damage amp of it is pretty significant and pretty strong. And makes up for a decently fun mechanic as well. As yeah, enemies will have either their head, their body, or their legs marked, and you kind of have to, you know, adjust your aim accordingly and try to sometimes get headshots, of course, and especially when you're hitting it on headshots with the headshot bonus as well. It's very strong. Just have a quick look at its model before we move on to its talent spreadsheet. it is actually kind of cool looking. It is an MDR kind of altered to work a little different, look a little differently with a very boxy suppressor, and yeah, this very boxy scope on it. It does look kind of cool. I do enjoy its look, and mechanically as well. It's a mechanic I quite enjoy, actually, having played around a little bit with it. It's a minor thing. You kind of have to just deal with it, hit the thing that is marked, and sometimes kind of course, if an enemy is behind cover or something, their leg might be sticking out, but their body might be highlighted. So sometimes you have to work around with that. Also important to note, everything like warhounds, deployed turrets, deployed drones, mini tanks aren't getting marked. So you do need to kind of pair it with a different weapon, but you definitely can, because you can just pair this, for instance, with an LMG or an AR or SMG, and well, mostly likely ARs, because SMG would have too much crit chance. It's very usable, I think, in its current state, but yeah, there is an oddity with it. Let's go to its spreadsheet and have a look at that. And yeah, that is this spreadsheet, as we're going over some of the talents in it. It is linked down below. It's has Vindicator in the name, so you can find it there. Testing wise, I went out and had to use the range first for just the normal numbers, but you don't get highlighted enemies in the range, and you do, of course, out in the wild. So I had to go into the wild and test it out. The weird thing was that, especially on headshots and on body shots, it lined up perfectly with having either I was running it on a high-end build where I had DTA as well. So with DTA or DTOC active, I had the Fox Spur as well. But the weapon itself didn't have DTOC on it, so it's only 8 or 8s basically, so the same. It's headshots, which are actually a little bit off the screen here, but just the normal headshots are here. The headshots plus crit are a little bit off the screen. Those line up perfectly fine, and line up with a 75 amp. So it's a 75 amp instead of this plus 75 weapon damage that it states on its talent, except for legs. And legs question mark was my issue for quite a bit, as I was trying to figure out, there was this other number popping up quite often, which was this 131 continued number, and yeah, it's not in that list. It was a body shot. Well, it was a leg shot crit, which would have to line up with a body shot crit. Legs and bodies are the same in most other cases, except for warhounds, of course, but they're special. To make it match, I just played around, basically back calculated to what the amp would need to be to hit that exact number, this exact number. And yeah, it's a 65.7895 amp. What? Likely there's just a reduction happening there with legs. For some odd reasons, it shouldn't. Legs on non-mechanicals should give the same damage. Basically on warhounds, they give reduced damage, but should be the same, but it isn't. And this took me a while to actually just basically give up on and try to figure it out, and then just basically back calculate to this number, because yeah, some weird numbers were popping up in between. But for the rest of it, yeah, it is a 75 amp, except when you get legs, and especially if you're getting a lot of heads marked, so you can headshot quite a bit. Yeah, those numbers go pretty high, and yeah, you can go check out this spreadsheet for yourself. We'll be looking at it as well in some other parts, actually, in a second, for the behind you. As yeah, that behind you is the new talent. Here we're looking at the perfect variant, perfectly behind you, and behind you is an odd naming scheme because yeah, what talent are you running? Behind you. Wait, what's behind me? You know, it's a little bit of an odd one out, but it kind of makes sense for what it does, because yeah, it's deal plus 60 weapon damage, as it states here, although we'll look at that in a second on the spreadsheet and see that it's an amp, which, yeah, a 60% amp, to enemies that are not targeting you. So it is conditional to enemies not targeting you, and of course this is kind of lining up with the new gear set and the new exotic pistol in getting some aggro away from people. On the normal variant, on the non-perfect, as I don't have that anymore, as I recalibrated those weapons away, it is 40%. I'll just say that. The named versions are the Whisper on a M16, and also the sniper rifle on a M700. And this Brutus, especially kind of with its perfectly behind you as well again, is seems like a decent deal. Enough, more than enough. This 60% is more than enough to compete with Determined, especially for people that don't like running Determined. Although, yeah, it's a little bit high. And actually, if we jump back to that spreadsheet we were looking at a second ago, and I make it a little bit big, as we scroll down a little bit, and yeah, we have this section for behind you. And the conclusion is that it's an amp. And we get to that conclusion by just doing the numbers, doing it basically for a FAMAS with no damage talent, and then the FAMAS with behind you, setting it as an amp, and testing it at the range, seeing if we get matching numbers with these, and we did. That's why they're greened up, meaning that yeah, it is a 40% amp. It is available on all weapon types, and then the named ones are only on a rifle and a sniper rifle. I was kind of expecting this to just be kind of like Determined, only on rifles and sniper rifles, maybe pistols as well, as the same with Determined. But it's available on everything, and yeah, 40% amp. Conditional, of course, pretty conditional, but you can hit this conditionality, especially, for instance, consider the first hunters in Countdown. They're targeting one player, 7 other people can have this plus 40%. Yeah, that seems a little bit much to me, actually. I would consider reducing this a little bit. As well, we see on with the M16, I tried it out as well for the perfect, and setting up a 60% for that. And yeah, we do get that 60% amp as well there, as the numbers jump up by 60%. That one especially is, yeah, a little bit too good, especially the M16 is getting a buff to itself as well, making it actually a very strong rifle. Now, it is conditional, and for the start of it, me included, with a lot of people were like, oh, you can just use turret and drone or decoys and stuff like that. They'll pull aggro away from you. Actually, in playtesting, I'm reconsidering that statement, because what turns out to happen is that while decoys usually do pull most of the enemies away from you, same for turret drones, the enemy you're shooting at will likely turn to face you, because you're out damaging your skills or the threat from a decoy by a lot. So, and that's usually quite fine, but yeah, it stands out here because, yeah, and if the enemy is targeting you, you're losing this 60% or 40%. Although, yeah, especially for a first shot, for that M700 to get Headhunter going, that's quite the increase. I would hope they maybe change it to 30% for the normal and 40% for the named. I could see that being being fine at those points, because yeah, it is conditional, so making it work kind of needs to coordinate the team. But this is kind of a buff to coordinated teams. Do you really want to do that by this much? For instance, think of Right, in that has a very consistent aggro mechanic. A Banshee isn't that far behind, isn't 40% behind the Ouroboros. So you're basically increasing it to pass that. And yeah, that seems a little bit too strong. Seems to be the consensus as well amongst the community. Let's move on to the next one. That is the rework changes to brand bonuses, especially on 2-piece and 3-piece. There's only one that's getting its 1-piece altered, which is held on 511. Let's actually start with the blue ones. The blue ones are getting a bunch of increases, especially on their second and third. Of note, as these of course was shown already with Project Resolve, and it's basically just changed a little bit. To point out especially that Gilligard is going to 2% armor regen on its 3-piece instead of the 3%, which was in Project Resolve PTS1. And in PTS1 as well, Golden Gear was 2% on its 2-piece. So they've basically reduced those by a significant amount. Yeah, that was kind of needed, because this kind of makes regen builds. This is actually decent. This is a decent change now. We're also seeing some 30% and 60% health rolls. They're trying to make health a thing, kind of. I don't think it will be, because blue cores provide you also a shield, increases to the shield tier. We don't really have mechanics to go with health, except for really Firewall's 30% health on kill and Hunter's Fury's 100% health on kill. But yeah, I totally don't see myself using 2 pieces of Gila Guard just to get this health and armor increases for Hunter's Fury to heal up, for instance. It's too big of a loss compared to the red stats that we already use. The regen, though, I could see this being kind of useful and making some forms of regen builds, especially maybe even with a ninja bike, maybe, because, yeah, they don't care about their damage that much. So you could go ninja bike and get a decent amount of regen out, but also, of course, Memento has 3% of its own. Other changes here of note is Habsburg going from 15 MMR damage to 20, which just seems like a silly change. Already Habsburg is, with 2 pieces, quite better than going Chainkiller and Araldi, for Hotshot especially. This going to 20% MMR just seems like a needless change and will likely drive more people to try to get those 2 pieces, and they're unicorns and very hard to get unless you get really, really lucky. It took me basically 18k worth of SHD points on my second account to get the chest and the backpack, Headhunter chest with headshot weapon handling and a Vigilance backpack with headshot weapon handling to record them to red. And this going up is kind of actually annoying, but of course a boost to people that already have it. So of note as well here is, actually no, it's not on this one. As we'll go to the yellow, of note here is that, yeah, they've brought back, they were doing, this is basically the same as the last one. Not many changes really. We don't really use most of these in the way that that are getting changes. Empress and Honey Yu, we're going to go to 20% with PTS1. In PTS2, they've reduced it back to 10, but they're still marked orange. So for I was hoping that maybe this was just an error in this picture and in-game there would be 20% in the PTS. They're not, they're 10% on the PTS. It wasn't a bad buff, actually, taking them to 20%. Skill builds are kind of behind. So drones, explosives, and oxys would kind of benefit from that. And that benefit, like, just do that benefit. They're pretty far behind. They could use the buff a little bit. No other big ones here, really, that are of use. On the red side, we also don't have many good changes. Especially Fenris going to 30% reload and Overload going to 30% weapon accuracy kind of stand out. And maybe, for instance, for ninja bike sets, for maybe if you're playing with controller and giving up that backpack talent just to get even more handling out of it. Yeah, but giving up brand bonuses, though, it hurts. It hurts. And all of these other ones, although especially, yeah, Cheska with 3 pieces being 90% health is kind of comical. But also, yeah, health just, yeah, it doesn't have the mechanics, really. It needs something, for instance, like Berserk of old. That's why we went health back in the day, because we had a mechanic to attach to it. Health in the game now, because also, for instance, doesn't give you increased shield tiers or anything. Yeah, I don't see it being used that much. This ammo capacity as well increases, as was also in the case with Brazos. Yeah, they're basically useless. I don't see them finding much use, but yeah, increasing your ammo capacity is nice and all. You're much better off just doing damage with the amount of bullets you already have. And yeah, not many other good changes here. This explosive damage will be a slight buff to explosive builds. That's basically it. So yeah, let's move on to the next as well. As we go into the spreadsheets again. In this burst and sustain table, I've updated the one from PTS1 to PTS2, basically reused that. It is also still actually in the main folder for burst and sustain tables, as it's linked down below, and of course the direct link as well is there. And it'll live there as well if you need it to have a look through it. Yeah, it has been updated to include some of the changes. The ones in blue are the added things in PTS2 that weren't there in PTS1. So they've added a few ARs, actually only, to the buff list. And that has helped a little bit, as we'll make it a little bit bigger, so easier to read. We're looking here at the burst table. And actually in here we can already see that... there are a few new weapons that have been buffed and have reached new heights. And we see a few weapons that haven't been buffed, especially as if they have no green or blue in there for the M4, the carbine, the SIG, and the TKB. They don't have buffs yet. They're falling pretty far behind, and that would be my actual thing that to start off there with is I would love for them to still give the M4 a carbine 7, especially the SIG, because the SIG is actually still behind. The carbine 7 and M4 were already, of course, top tier weapons now, and they're falling now behind way too far, basically. Same for the TKB, really, not so much as far behind as it is, but it has the same RPM as, for instance, the ACR with 650, but its base weapon damage is actually lower than the ACRs at this point. And the ACR is a much more usable weapon. It isn't as it doesn't jump around as much, so it should actually, to me, be higher than it. They've done it to the AKs now as well, so maybe they'll still give the TKB, the M4, and the carbine some love, and especially the SIG. The SIG is way far behind. And the CTAR and the Honey Badger didn't get enough of a buff. They're only getting magazine size increases, which helps them with sustain. That doesn't factor into burst at all. So yeah, those two are falling behind. But yeah, if we look actually at the ones going straight to the moon, the F2000 is still the top of this list, but actually in a second we'll go into builds, because we have to kind of look at them on builds, because the top three, of course, here now are -1 mod, and this -1 mod means -1 crit chance mod specifically. So they have 5 crit chance less on a build, and especially strikers that most of us run them with, that is, yeah, you want as much crit chance as you can get. So I do have prepared as well an updated version of having it on builds and comparing the burst and sustain on a build, actually. But yeah, we see that the AKM shot to the top, the PDR kind of shot to the top. This is the AKM with the -1 mod, but actually the military and black market ones are also doing pretty fine and actually lining up pretty close to the FAMAS, which is not getting any buffs at all. So this is how much of an outlier the FAMAS was. Other weapons are getting 5 and 10 and 10% added to them, and they're catching up now, basically. And yeah, there's a middle of a pack, which is all good weapons, perfectly fine to use, especially the G36, the ACR, the P416, and the Mark 16. I would definitely feel okay using. The AUG, it kind of jumps around too much, but it's also still good. The fall is decent here as well, especially for ammo conservation purposes, but I'd pick an AK over it, really, for that purpose. Yeah, it is actually looking decently well, because especially if we exclude, for instance, the going from basically this M4 and the CTAR and the carbine 7 and the SIG, so this last 4, everything is within is within 7% of each other. If they give these 4 and also the Honey Badger and then the TKB also kind of a buff, making the Mark 16 the end of the burst line again, as that's what it is currently, I would be totally fine with that, and that would actually, I would be pretty impressed with those changes at that point. As yeah, even though the F2000, for instance, here looks like an outlier, we'll see on builds it's actually matching up kind of like with a FAMAS. So on its burst and then out sustaining it, and especially with its 60 round mag is doing pretty well for itself. The condolences for a FAMAS should still be kept back, I feel, as a FAMAS is still very competitive. Yeah, let's look at the exotics, of course, before we move on. And the exotics as well are getting, some of them are, of course, getting rebalanced basically by having access now to their third stat becoming detox, which, for instance, on the Bighorn, on the Eagle Bearer is a big deal, on a Chameleon as well is a big deal. So yeah, and actually even Capacitor as well, as only the Elmo had that option so far. While these burst numbers are basically a little bit deceiving, so we'll have to look at them on a build, because yeah, they have wildly differing amounts of crit chances and crit damages on them. And especially here, for instance, the Eagle Bearer looks way ahead of the Elmo, but actually we'll see on build that it's not that far ahead. And yeah, you can of course go look at them at your own leisure. We'll only go over the bursts here just to be quick. Let's move on to SMGs. And with SMGs, we see that there are no blue ones. Nothing has actually changed between PTS 1 and 2 in the game. But the burst and sustain tables have actually changed because I made a boo-boo. I didn't actually, well, I had calculated out the new base numbers for the MP7 and the Banshee specifically. I hadn't put those back into here, so they underreported a little bit because of that. And now they're reporting as they should. And we'll only again look at bursts here. And the interesting thing is that especially because of the Vector not getting any buffs, as it has no greens, it is actually falling behind the Banshee. And the Vector already was an outlier in the SMG category, kind of like the FAMAS. But its big downside was especially its damage per mag being atrociously low and like eating through ammo, of course. Now the Banshee is above it on burst, and it is a much more usable weapon already than it. It doesn't have a long rail, that's its only real downside. And also we see here the MP7 actually being pretty high up on its burst, and even not being that far behind on sustain, even with 10 rounds less. That is quite impressive, and that's very much down to its short reload there. There's also a fast hands comparison, as we'll jump to in a second. There we kind of see that, yeah, that especially the Banshee is going to be my pick for the coming season for a general SMG. Of course, the Oreo, as we'll go to the exotics, is still top of the list. And yeah, on burst DPS, quite unbeatable. And it even has, you know, the similar crit chances as most of these weapons. Yeah, the other weapons haven't been changed here, but of course, again, all of the SMGs will have the ability now to have Detox as their third stats, which will help some of them and catch up on build, especially to Ouroboros. Actually, yeah, if we go to the fast hands one, as that also, of course, actually does exist for the AR one, if you want to go have a look at it, especially once we factor in fast hands, and we're kind of factoring the mag size and unloading, hitting everything, kind of theoretical, but on average, it should line up to show a little bit how fast hands affects this, as that will be my talent of choice. The MP7 just having 40 round mag is already falling away a little bit if you're especially using fast hands. This is the reason I will personally go with Banshees, especially for just general use SMGs, if I want to have a different exotic, especially because that's really the only reason to not use the Ouroboros for me. I have one. The other option, of course, is to, for instance, have a Scorpio in there, or if you don't have the Ouroboros, a Banshee is kind of my top pick here. Yeah, let's move on to LMGs as well. And LMGs are, of course, the big winner of the Project Resolve weapon rebalancing. As yeah, they're shooting up in their bursts, as we're comparing them here again on burst. All of the high ends are getting plus 20%, and that's a lot. To me, they're actually overtaking ARs as the general use weapon. You kind of have to deal with the suppression mechanics of them, of course, because they do suppress more than ARs. It's not that ARs don't suppress at all. It's just LMGs do suppress more. But you can kind of as well circumvent that by going with a lower RPM on an LMG. So for instance, a 600 RPM LMG kind of suppresses as much as a FAMAS to me, basically, in general use. Although what you also have is the inaccuracy with your first few shots adding into suppressing. The suppressing seems to work at as missed shots. So shots going past an enemy, kind of in an area around them, they basically likely have a hitbox. Any shots going through that add to their suppression mechanic. And of course, LMGs being kind of inaccurate with their first few shots add to that quite a bit. The everything moving up 20% means that basically, yeah, this whole list is still the same as was in current one, except everything is just 20% better. And yeah, to me, especially an infantry MG5 is a good pick. M60s are a good pick. RPKs are a good pick. LAD6 somewhat as well, although it has a somewhat smaller mag, of course. Kind of feeling like a bad AR to me. I'd rather have an RPK or an infantry MG5. And yeah, as well with the exotics, they're getting different numbers. So the Iron Lung is getting actually 10% now instead of the 15% they had in PTS1. That's why it is the only blue number here. The other two, if I actually get out of the way a little bit, you see that only the Pestilence didn't get a buff. I'm unsure why they chose to do that, as the Bezalance could definitely use a buff, but yeah, it didn't get one. I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with Lengmo getting 30% LMG damage, because yeah, you could actually maybe increase the tick by that, by quite a bit. But it's just a weird one. Yeah, the Bullet King and the Blue Screen are getting buffs. And actually, the Bullet King, I've messed around a little bit with it, putting Detox on it, going from crit damage third to, it has Detox, of course, putting crit chance on it. Helps it out a lot and makes it generally usable, especially. And yeah, the Bullet King is actually now not that bad, because yeah, you can put crit chance on it as its third stat and make up for its atrocious mods, basically, where it only has 5 crit chance versus the other ones, and then its talent is good enough. But yeah, I would still very much go with RPKs and stuff like that. The Ironling as well, moving up 10%, is still, yeah, very, very manageable, but now actually it's getting eaten up a little bit in the pack, although it does have 40% crit damage mods, but it then lacks 15% crit chance that these weapons would have, and of course the ability to go steady-handed or fast hands with these. And yeah, especially with the LMGs, the fast hands comparison is kind of important, because that's kind of the talent you go for, either fast hands or steady-handed, at least for me. There we see, yeah, the RPK jumps to the top, and this is the reason I prefer the RPK very much over the LAD6. But yeah, as well, the named fast hands, of course, is on LMG, the good times. I love good times. Good times are good times. And several others as well, with the Infantry MG5 being in the middle of the pack here, but the Infantry MG5 actually has 30% more headshot damage. So actually, if you actually kind of aim high, you can kind of make it, you know, basically has a little buff to its damage that way. So yeah, LMGs are kind of looking good, and actually in a second we'll compare some AR builds to LMG builds, basically the same striker build what's set up for ARs or LMGs, and we'll see kind of how that lands up. But yeah, let's finish off with the rifles. And to hit that first, again, I made a little boo-boo, because yeah, no changes were made to rifles as we went through the entire list and checked. It is the exact same as PTS number 1. One thing that did change in these burst and sustain tables is that I had forgotten with the LVOC and lightweight M4, which are actually unlisted in that list. By the way, this is why they have red numbers here. These are unlisted changes, checked with in-game, or checked with the PTS. So it is in the game, it's just not in the patch notes. But I had, again, forgotten to actually, after calculating out their new base damages, to actually put that back into the list. So a small boo-boo, but yeah, they've moved up quite a bit since PTS1, but not due to actually changes in the game, but just due to my mistake. And yeah, they really look good. M1A CQB is still, of course, very much king of the burst hill, but especially, of course, it has a 15-round mag, or really, if you put a +5 mag in it. These weapons can have 30 rounds and then also have the stability mag, or can have 50 rounds, which is quite the increase, as you can imagine. They're still pretty far behind it, of course, if we're comparing to that M1A CQB. And yeah, all the other rifles look pretty good as well. And especially for me, the standout here is the Mark 17, as most people use the classic M1A, especially because it has that very easy to use fire rate, 3 clicks a second. The Mark 17, you kind of go to 4 clicks a second and a little bit. That's still manageable for most people, and it's far up enough in this list to be worthwhile using, because from there on, it is all faster firing rifles, and unless you're macroing it, this will is a fast way of getting to some arthritis, basically. So while I do enjoy my ACR SS, especially, and I will continue to use that a lot, M1A CQBs as well, I'll continue to use those. I'll add in a few Mark 17s. I'll likely still keep around the classic M1As, because they're still useful. And yeah, the buff, especially to UIC, is kind of not enough to make it work, I feel. Although they've basically not left anything too far behind, except they forgot to actually, the SOCOM M1A needs to be the same number as his M1A CQB. They're basically the same weapon. They forgot this, on TU10 a long time ago to actually give it a buff, and it's still far behind. On the exotics, if we go there, the Doctor Home, the Merciless and the Ravenous are actually getting buffs. The Doctor Home and the Diamondback aren't. But again, here several can get Detox now, and yeah, that will help them out quite a bit. But yeah, it's still, you know, Ravenous getting a buff is actually kind of a little bit weird, as it was a top tier weapon already. Yeah, so let's move on from this, as I'll try to quickly go over two spreadsheets that I've prepared. This first one actually is from the previous video still, where we had the ARs already with the FAMAS and the F2000, putting them on builds, especially having as well talent calculations and putting that together with Elmo. So actually we'll jump straight to the second one, where we're putting a FAMAS, F2000 and an Elmo, especially the second one with Coyotes, because the second one is with Coyotes. I went over this in the previous video. The FAMAS is still winning on burst, and by a tiny amount, especially once you put in a talent like strained here. It is losing out on sustain, because both the F2000 and especially the Elmo will out sustain it, even with strained. But then of course, yeah, the Elmo is falling behind, especially with strained on the FAMAS. Yeah, so FAMAS is not dead. FAMAS is very much not dead, and that comes very much because of that loss of a crit chance mod basically on the weapon. So you kind of have to put it on the build, losing a little bit of crit damage, and that makes up for the difference in their burst just on their base stats. We already had this last AR list, and actually if we just instantly jump to the second list, as that was the PTS1, if you want to kind of read along, that was the PTS1 sheet linked below. This is the PTS2 sheet linked below, as I'm trying to go fast and struggling with my words. We've added in these four weapons. These are the four weapons that are also now getting buffs. So it's the AKs, but then yeah, split into the AK without the muzzle, and then the military and black market AK, the PDR and the AUG. We're still keeping as well. We've added in the Bighorn now, which wasn't in the previous list. Eagle and Elmo and Bighorn are kind of at the end here because of, while these numbers, the burst and sustain here seems much higher than all of the high ends. Keep in mind that the high ends still get to have a talent on top. So if, for instance, you consider that, you know, you put Optimist or Fast Stance or Strained on all of these weapons, all of the high ends will jump up. And they will actually, especially for instance with Strain, they will go way past the Eagle and Elmo and Bighorn on damage. Although, of course, then the Eagle and the Elmo have utility talents. For instance, the Bighorn has its own damage talent as well on top of it, which isn't calculated into this. This is just its base stats without the talent in there as well. So Bighorn actually looking pretty good. With the new weapons in there, I haven't sorted it out by burst, but what we can quickly see is, yeah, the FAMAS is still actually the burst king, but then the F2000, because of its sustain being so much higher, I will actually start using F2000s quite a lot. If we then go to, yeah, the ACR, the G36 and P416, which were really good looking weapons, especially on the burst and sustain together. The AKM, especially the black market and military AKM, because this is again on a build. So we're accounting for that loss of crit chance on, for instance, this AKM on the base one, because that one was, of course, basically at the top of the list, sharing being at the top in the top 3 in the burst and sustain. But here, because of that loss of that crit chance mod, yeah, it is a lot less than having the black market or military AKM, which can have one crit chance mod more. The PDR as well is kind of middle of the pack here, doing okay for itself. The AUG as well, it's kind of in the middle of that pack, kind of like the P416s and stuff, although they're sustaining a little bit better than, for instance, the P416. The standouts to me here are the ACR, the G, or well, after the FAMAS, of course. The FAMAS and the F2000 will be the top dogs, shared together with the Eagle and the Elmo. I feel that's basically my top picks. Especially if you're looking for other weapons, for instance, for flatline, because, of course, all of those can't be flatline weapons at all. So ACR, G36, P416, military / black market AKM, and no, that's actually it. Those are all pretty good. The AUG, the PDR, the Mark 16, P4 Fall are actually okayish. CTAR and Honey Badger, which isn't in this list, are pretty bad. M4 and Carbine 7 are also pretty bad now. That's why they're not in this list. They haven't been updated, and they're very far behind at this point. So yeah, that's kind of the new order of things for ARs. Let's move on actually to the next one, which is comparing ARs versus other things. As yeah, this is not a very extensive list, but we've put a F2000 and a FAMAS here at the top, with the FAMAS being the comparison point to all of these things. We've put DTA to 60%, cutting down a little bit on the DTH bonus that the ARs would have. And then for one build, we'll also have a contractors in there affecting that as well, getting 60% of that. Yeah, the FAMAS and F2000, of course, are already lining up as they already were. We've added in here an RPK with rate of fire as its third stat, and then crit chance with a third stat, and crit chance plus contractors. And of course, these two are the two top picks usually for LMGs, rate of fire or crit chance for general use. But they also, of course, require different builds. So I basically put the builds together to optimize for their choices. Yeah, we see that especially without the contractor, so still going Cheska. So with the other one, it's with Cheska plus 2 mods plus the contractors. The other ones are actually with the Coyote and active to the mid-range for these two. Yeah, the rate of fire actually wins out a little bit on against crit chance on strikers, because you can't make that crit chance work really well on strikers. Except actually if you put it in contractors and in groups, because if you put it in contractors and in groups, there's actually a different setup than here without Coyote, because we're going Cheska chest still with Obliterate and then contractors. Here I've done it for solo play, so that was my conceit there. Especially in groups, if you're getting Coyote from somebody else, you can actually set it up as 50 crit chance, and then actually it wins out. But of course, whenever you're getting Coyote from somebody else, or expecting to get Coyote from somebody else, same would be the case if the other builds gave up their Coyote for a group piece, and they would shoot up 8% kind of, and this would actually shoot up by a little bit more. So yeah, basically Cheska and the contractors kind of still line up for those kind of builds. Here as well, I've put up the numbers for an infantry MG5, and yeah, we're keeping weapon talents out of this as well, I should say, because actually with fast hands, of course, the RPK and the infantry MG5 gain more from fast hands than the F2000 or FAMAS would, because they just have bigger magazine sizes, so can reliably hit higher amounts of fast hand stacks. Yeah, they all kind of line up, and this is the reason as well, for instance, why I do like the MG5, because here we're going for a 20% headshot rate. That's the numbers that I've kind of put in here from the builds and just altered them to be 20% of whatever the build had, basically. Attributing around 20% headshot hits, which, you know, if you try hard, you can kind of get that quite easily, even with an LMG. And especially, yeah, that increase on headshot that the MG5 has here, that is actually quite strong. It makes it competitive enough with the RPKs, for instance, on burst. That's still the reason for me, for instance, why I grab infantry MG5s especially. The normal MG5 isn't worth it because you do need those 3 crit chance mods, and it has 1 crit chance mod less. The Bullet King here is, yeah, pretty far behind actually, of course. And this is still, and this is with accounting for it having a crit chance third stat. So with the alterations, so Bullet King still loses out, but its utility is kind of nice. And also, of course, it actually has an ammo both for you and the group mechanic. So it can be useful in some cases. But then also we have the upgraded CMMG Banshee here on a striker build setup for it. So more of an Oreo setup for a striker build with a little bit more crit damages. And also the Oreo as well on its setup. And of course set up the builds to match kind of to what they would have. And yeah, the Banshee here as well really looks good with its buffs. It is actually, it used to be basically kind of in this like 15% ahead of the ARs, but of course you're locking yourself to an SMG which has less accuracy, has less optimal range. but here it's now 25%. Now also imagine the difference between the Oreo and the CMM Banshee with behind you active for 40% extra to the number of the Banshee. That will actually beat out an Oreo. And yeah, the Oreo on its own, of course, is in a different league. And that's kind of why I'm kind of okay with all of the balancing changes and even making some weapons a little bit overpowered, like the F2000 coming in as hard as it is with, for instance, that, or the LMGs being ahead of ARs since the first time since a long time. The Oreo was always still there and had silly numbers to begin with. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of not that perturbed about issues with balance, because yeah, the Oreo already existed. We're dealing with that. Although, of course, Oreo, the difference, for instance, in Incursion, playing it with 3 people running Elmo versus, well, the 3 DPSs on the bosses running Elmo or running Oreo, the difference is night and day for me. So, for instance, with the Elmo, you'll struggle a lot more. You kind of also have to go a lot slower with some of the tactics. With Oreos, you just burn through them, and we kind of see that as well, because, yeah, an Elmo would basically be the same DPS as this FAMAS and F2000, really. So yeah, new overlords. Well, no, Oreo was still the overlord. LMGs are competing, having a little bit too much damage. I would think 15% maybe to them would actually be adequate. I feel, especially on builds when comparing on builds. 20% seems a little bit much, but also they still have their limitation. You can't use them with shield. They have suppression mechanics. But yeah, I can definitely see more coordinated teams moving to LMGs, especially if you have a Fire Eclipse with you for heroic content, or an Foam Eclipse for legendary content. I'll definitely start using LMGs for instance, legendary runs over even Elmos, because yeah, these numbers are quite a lot higher, and especially their sustain as well is higher. So their lower bound is higher, and the top bound is higher than ARs currently are, and especially, for instance, with fast hands, they even benefit more than that than ARs do. So yeah, LMGs do really matter now. So is that good to see? I like LMGs, so it's kind of good to see, but also I think it's a little bit much. I would much more prefer them to be 15%, kind of lining up this RPK and the Infantry MG5 up with the FAMAS and the F2000, really. Maybe as well, then still keeping the 20% for things like the Stoner and not the GR9 per se. Well, maybe the GR9. But yeah, some of the other weapons that are kind of behind in that category, because there are a bunch of weapons, especially, for instance, the Stoner, that is way behind everything else. So yeah, I'd much rather see a rebalance as well within LMGs, but we may see that in the future. We may even see that when the patch hits, because yeah, none of this is final. So also, yeah, don't throw away your M4s or Carbine 7s yet, because they might still give them a buff, and I would definitely hope they would. And to round it out, as we're head to the end, the 3 things I still wanted to talk about here is the combat gear lock, which is very annoying and gets in the way. I've ran into it already and went, combat gear lock! Yeah, it just gets in the way quite often. It's just annoying when you've loaded up a build and you forgot to put in a coyote, for instance, in my case, or remove a coyote because it was too many, and you're in combat and you can't do that anymore. To me, that's actually more of an issue than swapping weapons because you run out of ammo, as a lot of people keep bringing up. I haven't done that in like years. Even putting in a Scorpio or something because you need CCing or something, also not a thing I quite often do. I'll already assess the situation. What I won't do is, for instance, especially gear. I'd load up a build and forget to, as some builds are saved with, for instance, 5 pieces for me. As for instance, so I'll bring up here, for instance, this negotiator build is saved up as 5 pieces, just so I can either put in a coyote or a memento, for instance, into it. This build, if I load it up and go into combat before remembering to actually swap one of those pieces out, is just annoying, because I had that ability before and don't have anymore. And yeah, them being stubborn about it just is a weird look. I don't understand why. Really, their dev note was laughable. I didn't put out anything specific on it, but yeah, stream we discussed it a little bit. The other changes as well, that it is not active for rogue players, and not active as well for the first minute after you join a group. Kind of breaks what they're likely trying to do with it, which is avoid exploits, because now just if you want a busy little bee swap, you can just join on that group, right? And then like leave the group and go like, okay guys, you guys set up the boss, I'll join on, let me know like 10 seconds before it, so my loading screen overlaps with it, and just I load back up, and then you have 1 minute of freely changing your gear. So yeah, it doesn't even solve that issue in my eyes, and it's just dumb. They should just drop it. It would actually be, because now they've made a big mess out of it. If they just drop it now as well, the community will go, okay, hey, they'll listen to us. It's an easy win in my eyes. Just don't do it. Especially as well as kind of thinking of maybe they're adding something in with this new season that would break without a combat gear lock, but that hasn't been the case either. I don't see, like the pistol was what I was thinking when I saw the patch notes, but actually, yeah, it doesn't retain the second you swap off of it. The marks all go away because the talent is no longer available. So yeah, I don't see why they're doing that. Another one as well is Descent. For Descent, they're implementing an rotation, locking out some of the talents. It's just annoying because depending on as well how long the rotations will be. So in the PTS, they were every 6 hours, but that's likely not going to be in the main game because that seems a little bit too much. Maybe likely weekly, and that, yeah, or maybe daily. You'll just have to wait for the good days to go do Descending. I'd much rather have the ability that I have now of just going whenever I want and having all the talents. One thing I have speculated as maybe being a good fix for it, and you could even have that be a sync for NSA tech, is that you maybe could buy 2 or 3 slots where you could have fixed, where you could personally pick talents. So the dev picks some talents, and then you have the ability to pick 3 talents as well per class, basically per color, to lock in so that you have your preferred ones always. That would, to me, fix up a lot of this. But yeah, the rotation isn't that great. Although, yeah, they've added a bunch of stuff to the NSA vendor. The exotic caches, for instance, as well, are in the PTS are 220 per cache, same as kind of countdown costs. And that's a pretty good, okay price for exotic caches. The Vindicator Rifle is in there. And also, they've actually added the suits in there as outfits, so you can have them outside of the descent as well, so you can wear them around in the open world. And yeah, I'm looking forward to grabbing 1, 2, 3, and 4 and putting them on my first 4 character, or my 4 characters of my main accounts, just so, yeah, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4 then at that point. But yeah, the send changes are also kind of, the rotation I would hope actually doesn't go in, and especially for deep runs, it just hurts it, because on deep runs, even with the increased amounts of talents, you were perfectly fine picking all of the talents that you kind of liked, because after a while you're kind of have enough credits to more easily just pick whatever you want. Much easier fix than this, to me, would have been if they made it just 5 picks for talents, or 6 even picks for talents, 5 exotic talent picks maybe when you get the exotic talent picks, increasing the chances of getting what you're looking for. This rotation is just annoying because, yeah, when it's something silly as like, oh, the devs want, for this day, everybody to run mostly skill builds, and they've picked a bunch of skill build talents, I'll just avoid Descent that day, but I might be in the mood to do Descent that day, and now I have to go around. One last thing, though, to not end on a sour note, projects are getting an increase to even more exotic components, and that's quite nice, as they've already buffed how much they give for the XP that they give, added a bunch of caches to a bunch of the projects, and now as well some exotic components. This is a great change, because yeah, we'll be eating up exotic components quite a lot, re-rolling a ton of exotics. So yeah, not a bad change. Yeah, let's move on to the conclusion. To conclude this video and recap some of my thoughts. Yeah, mostly the gear and the talents and the weapons and the talents are pretty okay. Especially I think some of the gear set will find use. The brand will find some use in some places. The talents are kind of useful as well, especially that tamper-proof now being on backpacks as well. I could see that finding some use. Overall, I think it is a good update for gear and weapons, the additions. As well, the gear and weapon rebalancing. The gear side, yeah, it's kind of hard to rebalance high ends because it can also, gear sets, of course, are pretty powerful. So we use brand sets in them, so it's a buff to them whenever you buff them. So I can see the issue there. But overall, I'm actually pretty optimistic over some of the changes, especially the gear log and the descent changes kind of sour it for me. Weapon rebalance wise, I'm actually pretty surprised as how it's turning out. LMGs, yeah, I think they're a little bit overtuned, although they will likely never be the general meta anyway to begin with, as the suppression mechanics kind of get in the way of that. But I think they will really get picked up for coordinated groups as a damage buff for places where you were already not using, for instance, an Oreo because you just needed the range. I'll likely swap to LMGs instead of swapping to Elmos or FAMASs anymore. Parts of it do feel like change just for the sake of change, and especially leaving behind some of the classics in the M4 and the Carbine 7, for instance, feels just like, you know, oh, just go refarm these new, better weapons because we just made those obsolete. I do hope they still just add those in. There is still time, as likely this patch will go in after 6th of February. Likely maybe even just at the end of this season, we'll start the new season after the 2 weeks of Golden Bullets coming up. And yeah, it's overall a decent enough change, decent enough update, I feel. There's no new content, which is the big downside, of course. We'll have the manhunt, which will be some content, of course, trickling through, but no big incursion, no new game modes, no maps to, current game modes, even because an extra countdown map or an extra descent map would be also very appreciated. We might see those in the future. Although, yeah, of course, as well with Project Resolve's first part, hopefully some stability and gameplay, well, general gameplay improvements, especially stability and performance, I would hope gets increased by a lot, especially stability. Maybe even a fix to that countdown issue of crashing when it's the close extraction. But we'll see. I haven't had the chance to test those in the PTS because I didn't run much in groups, for instance, for the checking the countdown bugs. Although there was a freeze happening in the PTS, where once in a while the game would freeze, as it sometimes already does. It would never crash, but it would just freeze for 2 seconds and then you could go move on with your day. I hope that doesn't make it into the main game, but I would hope that that kind of things should be, part of Project Resolve. So I'm a little bit hopefully optimistic for once, and look forward to actually getting the finalized numbers and seeing and inputting those into the final pieces and start reworking a lot of builds, likely on the build collection, as a lot of weapons will be changed and maybe as well a rework or two for some of the builds. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, if you enjoy my content, if you can help me out with the algorithm in the ways that most of everybody knows how to do that, right? I won't outright say it. As always, I'll be streaming quite often on Twitch and YouTube, as I'm dual streaming nowadays. And also, as always, have a good night.